Hi y'all, this is House Guest and I am your host, Kenzie Elizabeth. Think a Gen Z wannabe Martha Stewart meets Dolly Parton trying to live in a Nancy Meyers movie in her 20s. We talk all about life, relationships, navigating your 20s, closing out the bars, or waking up at 5 a.m. depending on our vibe that week. Ultimately, living our best lives and figuring it out along the way. So come hang out. Sometimes I have guests on who do really cool things, some of my best friends, or it's just me and my house that I spend way too much time in. So let's get into the show. Hi y'all, welcome to my home. Hello to my house guest. I really need to be playing off that name more. I feel like I'm not doing enough with the name. Today there are no house guests. It's just me, myself, and I. And I'm actually going to be recording a solo episode that I've been wanting to record for a long time. This is the perfect intro episode into House Guest Podcast. If you guys are new here, or maybe you haven't listened in a while, or maybe you want your friend to start listening, this is the episode that you send and the episode that you start. Because what we're going to do is I'm going to share the 13 best pieces of advice / biggest life lessons / quotes and things that I just like and I live by and I reference all the time. Because if y'all know me, which at this point I feel like you do, and if you don't, you will very shortly because this is all I talk about, I'm very all or nothing, and if I like something, I really like it. So if there's a saying that I have, it's the Southern girl in me, I think, too, because girl, we just love a metaphor, okay? If there's something that I like, I really go all in, and if there's a saying or a piece of advice or some sort of life lesson, I will find a way to intertwine that into a conversation every single day. Okay, so all of the things that I'm saying, if you guys are a house guest listener, they maybe wouldn't be things that are brand new to you, but they're things that are great reminders and very helpful for this time in your life. Okay, it doesn't matter where you're at, they're going to be helpful, okay, because they're helpful to me and they're helpful to a lot of other people who listen to the podcast, and these are just kind of random things that I really live by, but it's nice because they're all going to be in one episode. And then at the end, we're going to do a little house guest glossary to kind of fill you guys in on the lore. If you need to know who Dom and Macy are, if you need to know who Coco and Fitz are, if you need to know breadwinning housewives, serial hobbyists, all of the things, Texas, a little bit, things that you need to be filled in on, we're getting there, okay? Also, the video today, you guys might be like, wow, Kenzie, that looks absolutely so stunning and perfect. How did you possibly do that? I finally hired for video, okay? And that just means that the podcast overall production is 1 billion times better, okay? The clips, the YouTube channel, everything. And if you guys are not watching the podcast on YouTube, you need to get your phone out right now and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you don't know, YouTube's where my roots are. It's where I got my start. YouTube's what made me, I think. There's a lot of people that have found me from the podcast, so maybe you wouldn't know that. I'm a YouTube girl through and through. I started my YouTube channel when I was 16, living in McKinney, Texas, and that is really the start of it all, okay? So I really feel like we need to be leaning more into the House Guest podcast YouTube channel. So that is why production quality is going to be 10 out of 10. Okay. We do still have some episodes that are pre-recorded from New York. So we will have some New York studio. And also, by the way, I will still be recording in other studios. So you know what? That doesn't even really matter. But I'm just really excited because I want, if it were up to me, every single episode would be recorded right here in this home. I have so much to say these days. And you guys might think, Kenzie, you always have something to say. And listen, I either have 1 million things to say and I'm making 17 TikToks a day. I have 15 new social posts. I have 17 new solo podcasts out drafted, or I have nothing to say for 3 weeks and I go mute. Okay, so that is where I've been. I've had nothing to say. And recently I made a list to send to my producer of all of these great, groundbreaking, incredible solo episodes that I have coming out, obviously. And there's so many. If I had a scroll and we pushed it down like they do in the movies, the scroll would just keep on going. All right, we've got so many good solo episodes. And I feel like that's kind of where I thrive. I really do love a guest episode, honestly, the most, because it's a lot easier for me. It really is, I'll be honest with you. But when I'm a solo episode's hard to record. It really is, because you're literally just talking to yourself and you also have to have a lot to say. So right now I'm feeling good about the solos, and I know you guys love a solo. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments on the YouTube channel below. Side note, this is the last thing before we get into today's episode. I recorded a solo episode a couple years ago, and it's one of my favorite things I've done on the internet, like point blank period. And the title of it is You're Not Behind, a list of people or a list of examples of people, something like that, who have achieved success, quote, later in life. So people who didn't, find what they were like passionate about, didn't start their careers, didn't like really hit the jackpot or whatever it might be in their mind until like at least 40 up. Not that 40 is later in life, but I just mean like the whole point behind the episode is that you don't have to have everything done in your 20s or even your 30s. We really focus more on people who are like 50 up. But like, for example, Martha Stewart didn't write her first cookbook or didn't publish it until she was 41. Ina Garten, I believe, actually, no, Julia Childs was 50. Oprah was fired at 23 from her broadcasting job. Like, there's so many. So anyways, I love that episode. And I do want to do a part 2, but I really want to do a part 2 with people who are like listeners of this podcast of like stories that they have. I understand that I probably don't have a 60-year-old listening to the podcast, but if y'all have a story of someone who followed their passions like later in life, figured out what they wanted to do, or even just like changed up their entire life, quote, later in life, please DM it to us on Instagram, on the Housecast Podcast Instagram, because I do want to do one with like a lot of stories from y'all. I feel like that would be such a good episode. So if you guys have a story like that, please send it my way. Anyways, so moving on to 13 of the most important pieces of advice I have ever received, okay? These are all things that I live by and all things that I, again, repeat over and over and over again. Number 1, this is something I learned in my college internship. Hold everything in life with an open hand. So if you have your hand out, think about something being in your hand and then you clench it, you're grasping it, you're suffocating it. Whatever is in your hand is going to die. But if you keep your hand open, there's room, there's air, there's sunlight, whatever that is can live and breathe and grow. So whether that be, relationships, the idea of what you want for your future, the idea of a timeline of your life, like when, there's so much pressure to do so much by 30, whether you want to be married by 30 or have kids by 30, like we all have these like random timelines in our minds that I don't know like who told us these things, but we just feel like we have to do them. So it could be that. It could be a career choice. It could be a move. It could be a mindset. It could be quite literally anything. But the idea is that if you're holding on to something too tight in life, you're going to kill it. And if you just keep your hand open, like I think about, we always talk about how important it is to change your mind. And like if you're not changing your mind as you're growing up, you're not growing and you're still 17. So if I would have held so tightly to the exact career that I wanted at 17, which is not the career that I have now, and I love the career that I have now so much, honestly, so much more, and it suits me better, it works better with the times. Like if I wouldn't have been open to change, which by the way, I wasn't for a long time, I wouldn't have been able to, have this podcast and start my home brand and like do so many other things. Like we've been able to evolve more into home. Like I was on Martha Stewart TV, like literally my idol. Like there's so many things that I would not have been able to do or I wasn't holding it with an open hand. Same thing with friendships. Like if you want a friendship to last the long haul, you have to understand that there's ebbs and flows. And if you hold on to that friend or that friendship or what you think that friendship should look like so tightly when you're in like different seasons of life, you're going to kill it versus giving it room and space and air to grow. So hold everything in life with an open hand. And also we should turn this game into take a shot every time I say one of these in the next episodes. Take a shot of water so like you're not in the ambulance, but I say these things a lot, okay? Number 2, this will come as no surprise and you guys might be shocked that it wasn't number 1, okay? This is a quote from the great Ed Milet himself. I love that man, all right? And it's confidence is built by making promises to yourself and keeping them. I say this all the time, and I truly, 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 truly believe that this is like the foundation of life. Confidence is built by making promises to yourself and keeping that. Like actually, if I were to tattoo something to my forehead, that would be it. And I look back to my childhood. Oh, you'll never guess what just got to the door. Guys, I literally ordered a rug for this room to be replaced to come yesterday, and it just arrived. So anyways, next time you guys will see there's going to be a really fancy rug in here. Anyways, my dad, he is Ed Milet Jr., okay? And I say that because he's very into leadership. I don't say that in the way that like Ed Milet is like a billionaire. Like my dad isn't that, but my dad is successful like in his own right for sure. But He is very into leadership. The way that Ed Milet's mind works is how my dad's brain works. So when I listen to Ed Milet, it feels like I'm listening to my dad talk to me like when I was a kid. And my dad's also emotional. And so Ed Milet will cry all the time. My dad's a very emotional guy. So anyways, I love Ed Milet. I look at this quote and I think that this is really what my dad did with me as a kid without realizing it. Like, we were super into routine. So confidence is built by making promises to yourself and keeping them, okay? There's so many things that I could say about this, okay? But think about if you are making early morning workout plans with a friend. You are a lot more likely to show up if you book a class and you know that you have plans with your friend, because you value your friend, you respect your friend, you value the commitment that you made to them, and you're going to show up. Over time, when we are making commitments to ourselves, so let's say we book, this is just like an example. You don't need to be doing a 6 a.m. workout, but let's say I book a 6 a.m. workout class. I wake up and I don't want to go. Subconsciously, that kind of is telling yourself, like when you're not showing up for yourself, like, oh, I'm not going to show up for myself. I don't value myself, because you show up for what you value, if that makes any sense. So when you make a commitment to yourself, you need to treat that the same way that you would when you make a commitment to someone else in your life, because you're showing yourself that you matter, that you have value, that you value yourself, you respect yourself, and you can trust yourself ultimately to show up. So over time, when you are making little promises or little commitments to yourself and you're showing up for yourself, you're building self-trust, which then is going to build your confidence. Think about when you have a friend that always shows up. It's like, oh, is she gonna call? Like, if you have, something that you need someone to show up for, you call that friend because you know that they're going to show up, because you trust them, because you've built trust with them over time. That is how you build confidence in yourself. I see how my dad did this with me as a kid without realizing it, because my dad has anxiety. I came out of the womb and he was like, this girl has anxiety. We need to like do some things about it. So he was teaching me like morning routines and routines and different things in life, like getting movement, that were really helping my anxiety. But over time, it was actually really building my routines. And because I kept seeing myself showing up and doing things, I think it was really building confidence. And if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Like, I always follow through, and I treat, obviously there's times that I'm not perfect, but I do really try to treat the commitments and the goals and the promises that I make to myself like I would that I make to a friend. Now, this isn't something that I just like naturally came out of the womb and I was like, I'm perfect. This is something that my dad really ingrained in me as a kid. But that's why I think this quote is so important, because if you're trying to build confidence, it's not even about like how you look. I feel like we're so focused on confidence in all the wrong areas, and we approach it in the wrong way. And I mean, the most obvious one would be like in a very more like superficial, like vanity kind of way, which is like another conversation and, whatever. But I think we really need to be focused on actually building trust with ourselves. So I would say like every single morning, I would just make a little small morning routine, okay? Like, I'm such a morning routine girl. We talk about this all the time on the show, but we have actual podcast episodes on morning routines. But making a very simple morning routine is a really good way to just start showing up for yourself in small ways, and then those small things become the big things. So anyways, confidence is built by making promises to yourself and keeping them. Number 3, identity capital. This single-handedly got me out of my quarter life crisis. When I was 23, those were really, really, really dark days, me in my 23rd year. And I'm sorry to anyone who listened to the show at that point, but I was like majorly going through it. Basically in that year, everything in my life had changed, okay? And I was just very lost. I was very confused. I was just going through, my quarter life crisis. Again, we have so many episodes on that if you guys need any quarter life crisis advice. If you go on the Instagram, by the way, we do roundups too. Any of these topics that I'm talking about, if you're like, oh, I want to listen to a podcast episode that's on that topic, if you literally go on the Instagram, we have them like by subject, and it's helpful. Anyways, identity capital, I think, is such an incredible tool. So I read the book, The Defining Decade, and I personally really liked it. But what I got out of it the most was identity capital. And it's this idea that your identity is made up of so many different things. It's your likes, it's your interests, it's the things you do, it's like the kind of the people that you're around. Not in a way that like, this is tricky because like I do think you should find your identity like in something bigger than yourself or something that's like whatever is important to you. But these are just really like identity capital. I look at it more as creating the life that I want to live and being the person that I want to be. It's not necessarily like I find my identity in these things. It's more that I become this person that I really like, therefore I've created this life that I really like to live. It kind of goes back again to confidence is built by making promises to yourself and keeping them. for myself at that point, I was like, okay, let me think about the kind of person that I want to be and like what I want to be doing, right? A really good small example was I had just been back to Texas, and I kept saying like I really want to get back into like riding horses. I didn't ride horses a ton as a kid, but I just love being around horses, and I was like, I really want to start riding horses. So that is something that I started to do, and over time I go riding all the time. That is like such a therapeutic thing for me. I've learned so much about myself on the ranch. Like I am so Texan. Like I love that stuff. But slowly but surely, like all of those little small things actually like created the life that I wanted to live and becoming the person that I wanted to be. I'm talking about this later, but I think it's more about like creating yourself versus finding yourself. So I love the identity capital concept. I think it's really helpful. I think it's very great, tangible advice when you're feeling lost in life. Identity capital is a collection of skills, relationships, and resources that people build over their lives. So it's basically everything that makes you, you. And that was just something that was really helpful for me, specifically in my earlier 20s. I don't know. I think it's like so important in every time of your life. Okay, number 4, this actually kind of goes off identity capital, but hobbies are the cure for everything. I think you need a hobby, and you need a hobby if you can, that uses your hands. There's some science behind that we're not going to get into. More than anything, it gets you off your phone, which I think is so important because we are all addicted to our phones, like every single one of us, unfortunately. And hobbies are so important because they refuel you and they refresh you and they make you better in every other area. Now, I've gone a little extreme with my hobbies, as we know, okay? And I'm like a serial hobbyist and I'm obsessed with all this stuff, and I've monetized a lot of it, if I'm being honest. But I do think that having a hobby, like me riding horses, I just started making sourdough, I garden, I love to read, I needlepoint, there's so many things that I like to do, and that has like made my life feel really fulfilling, and it's recharged me so that I'm better in other areas. Like, I don't know why, I don't think I made this actually a point, but this one should have been one. We get rest confused with just being lazy. And if you're trying to rest, you're trying to like recharge. Being lazy isn't necessarily going to do that. So like when we're all so worn out and we're burnt out or worn down, and then you take like a day to just lay around and like watch Netflix, and maybe this is something that recharges you. It could be, it doesn't recharge me. When I've done that, I'm like, I need a day to just like lay around and do absolutely nothing because I'm so burnt out, I'm so tired. At the end of that day, I would actually end up feeling worse because I didn't do anything that like fills my cup up or like refuels me, right? So I think hobbies are great because you're constantly doing things throughout your life that are refueling you. It's just good. It makes you a more interesting person. You are a more interested person. Therefore, you are more interesting. You have other things to talk about. You meet new people. You bond with new people. Like, I have met so many different people through my hobby endeavors. For example, Bobby from the farmer's market, he was over last week helping me with my fall garden. Like Heidi from Chaparral Needlepoint, like I love her. She's incredible. Like, there's so many people that have like come into my life because I've gotten really into hobbies and I learned so much from them. What I love the most about it is that they're not necessarily people that I would meet, as a 27-year-old, like out at like a bar or something, because obviously I'm around a lot of people who would be my age. They're at different ages and different stages of their life, which is really, really valuable. And I like to learn from people of all different walks of life. I actually think you learn more from people that you have like a lot less in common with. And the same way of like who I follow on social media, people that I like follow the most, I have literally nothing in common with, but they are who inspire me the most and kind of like get me out of, like kind of get me thinking a little bit bigger versus just in like my little lifestyle bubble. So anyways, hobbies are the cure for literally everything. Okay, number 5, routines make your world go round. I'm not even going to go into this one because I have so many episodes on routines and we've kind of already touched on it. But listen, routines are so important. If you do not have a morning routine, you need a morning routine. You need a routine of any sort, okay? Routines. Number 6, patterns over potential. This is something that I still am having to drill into my brain, okay? People will show you who they are. It is very simple. What matters about someone a lot more than what they have to say is the patterns of their life. People can say whatever they want. That just doesn't matter. Like, words don't hold much weight when there's no actual action behind it. I would have saved myself so much time had I just paid attention to the patterns of someone's life. I would have saved myself years of dating, honestly. Like, I would have saved myself so much heartbreak, being in bad relationships, being in bad working relationships, being in friendships that were not the best for either of us. Like, there's so many things that I would have saved so much time on and not had to deal with all of the problems of it had I paid attention to the patterns. So remember, guys, patterns over potential, and also trust the patterns of their life. Like, don't think that you are going to be the exception, okay? You have to live life as if you, which just sounds kind of depressing, but you have to live life as though you are the rule and not the exception. And also at the same time, like, I kind of don't agree with that, because like I do think you need to like live delusionally. Like, I think there's a lot of power in being delusional. But when it comes to relationships, you are the rule, not the exception. You are the rule, not the exception. Patterns over potential, okay? Because that is how you're going to meet the right person for you, you know? And not waste time with the wrong ones. The next one is discipline over motivation. I actually feel like I haven't talked about this one that much lately. This comes up a lot when it comes to routines, but I don't always want to get up and run. Like, when we have like a 6 a.m. run, oh my God, this week I almost canceled. I really almost canceled on a friend. Well, we were both trying to cancel in our defense. But you cannot rely on motivation in life. Like, motivation is a feeling. We can't live our lives being like led by feelings. If you want to achieve greater, or, you know, kind of get to where you want to be in life, it's going to take a lot of discipline. And motivation is a privilege. Motivation is not something that we can have 24/7. I also think that with discipline ends up coming motivation, but there are so many times in my life where, like, yeah, it would be absolutely incredible for me to stay at home by the fire, needlepoint, and watch like Law and Order SVU all day, every day. Like, listen, no one would love that more than me. I'm a homebody. I like to be home, okay? But in order to like build the life that I want for myself and like my future family one day, and all of these like dreams and goals that I have to achieve, you have to stay disciplined in order to make it happen. And the easiest way to show this is a routine. So whenever you have your morning routine, you're waking up a little bit earlier and your alarm goes off and it's tough, okay? You need to say to yourself, discipline over motivation, and get up. Like, that's what you have to do. You have to rely on discipline and not on motivation. This is something I learned in my internship through a talk that has always stuck with me. And this is from a very successful entrepreneur. And she said, there's really no such thing as balance, just different priorities at different times. And I think that is so good. She had a scale. What is it called when a scale has like two sides to it? Like an old school scale? I don't know, okay? She put 5 grams of work and then 5 grams of like a social life on the other side. And what ended up happening was these ended up just kind of canceling each other out, and neither one of the scales moved. So there was really no progress made. And she was saying, when you're really so focused on trying to keep balance in your life, which really doesn't exist, you're never going to actually get to where you want to be. So instead of focusing so much on balance, just understand there's different priorities at different time. Like, for example, when I was in school, my priority was my internship, school, and work. I really didn't get to focus as much on a social life. When I graduated and I was post-grad, I was like, okay, I just moved back to Texas. I'm in Dallas. My priority right now is a social life, like, in work, because I need to make friends. I need to build a life for myself. Like, and as time has gone on, now, you know, starting friend of mine, like, my social life definitely takes the back burner, you know? So like it's just different at different times. You hear this with conversations around being a mother all the time, which obviously I have not experienced yet, but they always say, like, you can have it all, just not all at once. And I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind. And I also think it's very freeing, because there's a lot of shame almost just in day-to-day, even outside of being a mom, which obviously that is such a way more extreme circumstance, and I'll be laughing at myself like later when I am a mom. But I feel like there's just a lot of shame around feeling like you have to be doing everything at the same time, and you just don't. So there is no such thing as balance, just different priorities at different times. Number 9, this is a quote I saw on Instagram, and I feel like this actually really encompasses the podcast quite well. If you spend your life chasing butterflies, they'll fly away. If you spend your life building a butterfly garden, the butterflies will come to you. I think that is so good, and so much of what we talk about on this podcast, this is just a really easy example, but like, if you think about that in dating, instead of like spending all of your time chasing the butterfly or chasing the guy, like, build a life that's going to attract the guy that you want. You know what I mean? And that can go for anything in life. But I just think it's so important. Again, like I've talked about it so much already on this episode alone. Like, focus on building the life that you want to live and becoming the person that you want to be, because then you are going to be more ready for the circumstances and the situations that you want to be in. You'll be attracting the right things into your life. Like, it's just so important. So again, if you spend your life chasing butterflies, they'll fly away. If you spend your life building a butterfly garden, the butterflies will come to you. Number 10, this is something that Macy and I talk about all the time when it comes to relationships, especially like my life the past year. Life is just a series of showing up for people, priorities, work, athletics, whatever it might be, whatever stage of life that you're in. Really, what life is about at the end of the day is showing up. Like, that, for me, relationally, I think that is my love language. Like, I really, really value showing up for other people in my life. And like, it kills me if I can't. And that, I think I put a little bit too much like pressure onto that sometimes. But I do think that the power of showing up is everything in life. Like, you need to be showing up for the people in your life. You need to be showing up day in and day out. It goes again to like discipline over motivation. So much of life is really just about showing up. Number 11, okay, the gap and the gain. You guys, if you're a podcast listener, you know this. So basically, I read this book, The Gap and the Gain, okay? And that book really did something for me. If you are an Enneagram 3, if you're an overachiever, if you are a firstborn daughter, if you're just someone who puts a lot of pressure on yourself, this book is incredible. We'll get to that later. But the lesson in this book is that we need to be operating almost out of rest and not striving, kind of what I was talking about earlier. But we are not happy because we are measuring ourselves from our ideal point rather than from where we started. Starting line is where we started, and the end is our ideal point, okay? And we're probably somewhere in the middle, but we live lives so miserable and depleted because we only measure ourselves from our ideal point, and we're, feeling bad about ourselves, feeling like we're not doing enough, feeling like let down, negative, just all of those things, which then in turn actually affects your work and affects how you're going to get there, instead of focusing on how much progress you actually have made, right? So instead of measuring ourselves from our ideal point, we need to be measuring ourselves from our starting point and like practicing gratitude and thinking like that's also just practicing like positive self-talk in general. But I loved that book so much. I literally did an entire podcast episode on this book. Like, it wasn't a book club book. It wasn't anything. It's a nonfiction book, but I read the book twice. I took notes. I highlighted it. Like, I went through a whole thing. I really recommend buying the book and reading it still. But that episode's really good. If you resonated with anything that I was just saying, highly recommend. Okay. So this one is actually a piece of advice I was given a week ago, and it is something that I have been saying to myself on repeat. It was given to me by my dear friend Kathy. We went to dinner. I was just kind of talking to her about some things I have going on in my life, and she said, "Can I read you something?" And she had like a page from some book or something and read off this excerpt, and in it it said, "A yellow light very rarely turns green. In fact, it almost always turns red." That's very easily applicable when it comes to our relationships. When you think about a yellow light being a red flag, and we're just hoping that yellow light turns green. Like, we're hoping that, we see all this stuff, but that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen to us. They're going to get better. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. But a yellow light very rarely turns green. In fact, it almost always turns red. And I think that's just like a very important thing to live by and to at least clock. Like, when you're seeing stuff like this in your relationships, at least for me, I'll give a billion chances. I have in the past, and we're working on that. And I do think it's really important to give people grace. Like, none of us are perfect. Imagine if none of my friends gave me grace, I'd have 0 friends, So I do think it's important, but it's important to like clock the yellow flags, and then you can have them. This is another thing Kathy said. Not everyone in your life needs to be a dinner party friend. Like, sometimes they can be a block party friend, and sometimes people will switch. They'll go from block party to dinner party, and sometimes you'll take a dinner party to a block party. Like, that's something I've had to do a lot this year with grief. Like, my relationships have changed completely. And so that has been really, really massive. And I think it's so amazing. Oh my God, guys, I wrote identity capital as 2 points on this. That's how passionate I am about it. But you know what? We did add another lesson in there. So we're still at 13 of the rest and recharge thing. So I feel good about that. But if you guys have listened to the podcast, these are things that I'm like constantly going back to and just life lessons and things that I will like literally pass down to my kids one day. The podcast has been amazing for me too, because I'm able to learn from like so many different kinds of people. So those are my favorite lessons in just life thoughts, pieces of advice that I have learned or received, I would say, in the past like 5 years, whether it be on the podcast or in my real life or any of those things. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Now we're going to get into the house guest glossary. If you are new to the show, listen up, okay? I'm going to fill you in on a little bit of the lore, a little backstory. I started this podcast. I started my YouTube channel when I was 16. I'm now 27. I started this podcast when I was 21. I actually don't know how old I was. It was 2018, 2019, I believe. 2018, fall of 2018, September 2018, I think, okay? So we're turning 6, actually this month. That's actually insane. Anyways, I started this podcast. I was in college. I really wanted a podcast. These were early podcasting days. How many times can I say podcast? My God. I was listening to like Girl Boss Radio season 1 when it was like back in the day. Okay. I loved it. I wanted to start a podcast. I had a manager at the time who sucked. He was such a hater. And he kept saying like, no, this isn't like what you should be doing, whatever. So I finally fired that manager, and then I started a podcast. In that time, I got in touch with Dear Media. At the time, they were brand new. I had no idea what a podcast network was, but I had a YouTube network. So I was like, maybe I need a podcast network. So I had reached out to them. We got coffee. I got coffee with Paige, and I was the first show that they signed that was born through the network. So there was like 7, I think, other shows at the time, but I was the first like Dear Media baby show born through the network. Okay. I say that because I say that all the time. All right. I just feel like I need people to remember that like I am loyal and I've been here forever. Okay. I don't know what it is, but I do say that a lot. Okay. So again, like this should not be a game of shots because this is scary, but I do mention that a lot. Anyways, the podcast did originally start out as the I Love You So Much podcast, but I never liked the name. Confession, I literally never liked it. But producer Taylor and I were trying to come up with a name. It was the only thing that kind of stuck. I liked it for branding purposes, for like merch and stuff. And I did feel like it made sense because this show is really like people that I love on, like that come on, right? The kind of like origin story of the show was that I was living like a pretty unconventional life for, a 20, 21, 22-year-old at this point. And I was in rooms where I was hearing all these conversations or learning from people that not everyone was able to, whether it be because of the internship that I was in at that point or just like work stuff. And I felt very lucky, and I was just learning a lot. I've always been like a very curious person, and I love to learn, clearly. Okay. So I was just thinking, wow, it would be so cool if I could bring, my followers into these conversations. So that is really kind of like the basis of the show. And then I'm just such a people person. I love people, all the guests I love. Okay. So that was that. Then about a year ago, I was like, enough is enough. Okay. I don't like the name. We need to rebrand. I have so many other things. I have a home brand friend of mine that I was launching. I have my YouTube channel, and I just needed everything to feel a lot more cohesive and complement each other. So we rebranded the podcast. Okay. Basically just the name. The show isn't different. It was just the name and the branding, and it's so much better. And I want you to feel like you are I want you to feel like you're on the couch with us. Like, even if it's someone that I'm talking to that's more of like an Ed Milet vibe or conversations like this, I never want to be approaching these episodes from a place that's like me on my high horse or like I know more or whatever. Like, I know these things because to be very, very clear, because I did everything wrong. So I'm trying to teach you guys, or not even teach you guys, I'm trying to share like what I've learned from these experiences. So maybe you guys don't have to deal with that, or can at least have a little bit more context when like maybe you do make the mistake, and I'll continue to make the mistakes, obviously. At least it'll be like, you know what, I did hear that somewhere. You know what I mean? But it's more so like I'm 27. I feel like I'm doing life with you guys, and I'm growing up with you all. So I feel like it's just, these are conversations that I have with like my friends day to day. Like all of these things that I say are things that I say to my friends all the time. I am the exact same person that I am on a mic that I am in like real life. Okay. So anyways, that's kind of like the little origin story of the show. Little things that you need to know. Required reading for the show. Obviously, the gap and the gain, okay? And then 10x is greater than 2x. Or is it 2x is greater than 10x? Same authors. They are so good. I'll put them on my Shop My for like books that are house guest required reading. Those books like actually have changed my life and like the way that I approach everything. It's not just business. Obviously, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm very into like the business world, but these books are incredible for anyone. You don't need to, even if you're in corporate, but like just your day-to-day life. Like, it doesn't even need to be business related. They're just incredible books. But if you are not a reader, I did record 2 solo episodes on both of those books, so you can definitely go back and listen to those. And then also, Magnolia Parks is literally like a core tenet of the show at this point. This brings up another topic of something that I always bring up, but since we're here, we're getting everything down. Like, this is everything you need to know for the show so that you guys are fully filled in, okay? Magnolia Parks, one of my dear, dear friends, Jessa Hastings, she is an author, okay? We got close in 2020 over Instagram. We had a lot of mutual friends. We have like kind of the same background. So we started talking via Instagram DM, and I was going through a really severe like faith crisis. I was going through just a lot in life, and I really look up to her as kind of like a big sister figure in my life. Like, I listen her advice and anything. Like, it's like Bible to me, right? And I really relate to her and connect to her, and I feel like very seen, like someone that like gets me, right? So we got really close separately. Magnolia Parks hadn't come out at this time, and she was releasing a book. I was a big reader. So she had sent me Magnolia Parks to read, and I read it, and I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever read in my entire life. Like, this is going to be the next like Twilight franchise. Like, I loved these books. So yeah, I read Magnolia Parks first, because you guys were wondering. And whatever, I read all the other ones too. But I'm kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding. I did read them, but I am kidding about the attitude. Anyways, I love Jessa. This is brought up because this was prior to her being like a known famous author, right? She was a dear friend of mine who was giving me all this advice, and it was really, really helpful. So I one day was like, hey, would you actually come on the podcast and we can have this conversation about like navigating your 20s? I hadn't really had conversations like that on the podcast before. People resonated so much with that episode that I really like changed kind of the trajectory of where the show was going. And I just started doing a lot of episodes on navigating your 20s. At this point, Jesse's been on the show like probably 7 times. Like, she's been on the show so many times. I'm going to do a whole playlist on the YouTube channel of all of those episodes. And it was before Magnolia Parks to now, where they're so massive. And it's been really cool because to see her like on camera when we're talking about it before it even came out, to like see what it's become has been amazing. But yeah, like, you will never listen to a book episode of mine without me mentioning her like a billion times, and the fact that I read the book before, so it is what it is. It's a really annoying trait of mine. It's a very pick me. Like, it is actually very annoying, and I'm really working on it, but honestly, that's just kind of how it is. Speaking of people in my life, Macy and Dom. So I mentioned Macy and Dom. I actually am shocked that I haven't mentioned them in this episode, because I'm trying not to as much, because it is a little excessive how much I bring them up, but those are like 2 of my best friends, and yeah, like, basically whatever they say goes, and I'm always with one of them, so I just bring them up all the time, and you just need to know that. Like, Macy, as you guys know, she's a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader, Snuff Baby, all these things. Gotta follow her on TikTok. And then Dom is my best friend from college. So Dom actually now has her own podcast with one of her best friends, Maya, that's so funny. You guys need to listen to Upstairs Neighbors. It's like hilarious. And they're like a YouTube show. Like, it's all on video. It's an incredible show. So yeah, they're both like influencers in their own right. But Dom was my best friend in college. She was not an influencer when we met at all. Like, she would come on the podcast like way before she had like a following or anything like that. And then Macy and I met basically through TikTok. We go into that on our episodes. So, and from Macy comes the J names, okay? And this was a really pivotal time in our lives. Macy basically had this really horrible experience with this guy. He had a J name. We wrote every J name off. I came in. I did like a Law and Order style episode. I might as well have come in with a briefcase. I was crazy. Okay, and that's an incredible episode to go back and listen to. But if you guys are ever wondering why my comments or people are saying to me J names suck, I can't go to like a bar. Like, the amount of times I will be on Nantucket and I will be at a bar and girls will come up to me and be like, oh my God, I've had such a bad J name experience too. Like, it's actually really taken on a life of its own. So that's where the J name things come from. CBM, this is something that Macy says, a certified bad mood, and sometimes you're just in a CBM and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what that means. Ed Milet, my idol, you guys need to know him, love him. Speaking of idols, we also have Martha Stewart, Dolly Parton, Nancy Myers. Love them. Martha and Dolly are my absolute dream podcast guests. I would literally die to record with them. Absolutely die. Grandma hobbies. I'm 27, but I actually am really 85. I needlepoint. I garden. I cook. I bake sourdough now. I do a lot of grandma things, and I hang out with my grandma a lot. So a lot of my hobbies that I partake in are grandma hobbies, and I do identify as a grandma. I say bodybuilding a lot or running a marathon. I speak in extremes on pretty much everything. Everything's a hyperbole, okay? So bodybuilding would be just like my weekly weightlifting class that I go to 3 times a week at Fit Social Club in Dallas. That is bodybuilding. And then running a marathon it's probably just like a good 4-6 mile run. Like that's pretty much it. I'm not actually running a marathon, but I just think life is more fun when you exaggerate some things like that. Like exaggerate things that don't mean anything, that are very meaningless, okay? And yeah, so if you guys ever hear like running a marathon, it's like 4-6 miles, you know? It's not really that. It's not what you think. Coco and Fitz are my 2 dogs. So Coconut is a little 5-pound Morkie. She used to be 7 pounds. She has IVDD. Her back legs don't work. She has wheels. It's like a whole thing. She's happy. She's good. She was named after the American Girl dog Coconut that I had as a child, and I loved her. And I accidentally, without realizing it, got a dog that looks just like that dog. Now, she was named after the dog, Coconut, but they just ended up looking identical. Then we have Fitz, and Fitz is my 70-pound dog that is the size of a horse. He's actually the size of a 100-pound dog, and he's named after President Fitz from Scandal. So Fitz is, I mean, he's just like America's greatest dog. Like he's like what you want as like a dream family dog. Coconut is like the funny small one that has an attitude and is like a whole, you know, she runs the house. And Fitz is like the sweet lover that was born to be everyone's favorite dog. You know what I mean? So anyways, they both have great names. Texas, I'm from Texas. It's like a character in itself. I love Texas. Talk about it all the time. Very big Texas girl. Everything I like, I take way too far and it becomes a personality trait. Like I invented making every single thing you could possibly make a personality trait. Most recently, sourdough. I haven't even baked a loaf yet, okay? Baking a loaf in a couple of days, it's not quite ready yet, but everything that I like becomes a personality trait, and I don't care. You know, some might say that's identity capital, so that's okay. Morning pages, I do reference this a lot on the podcast. Morning pages is a practice that was coined by Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way. That actually, I'm adding The Artist's Way to our required reading. So we've got The Artist's Way, 10x greater than 2x, Magnolia Parks, and The Gap and the Gain, required reading. But The Artist's Way is amazing. Morning pages, you wake up every morning, you write for 3 pages straight. It's very, very simple, but it gets everything out of your brain, out of your mind. It's an incredible journaling practice. I think it's amazing to like get to know yourself. It's great for anxiety. It's great to like kind of like get your thoughts out through anything. It's very transformative. I highly recommend it. So I do reference that a lot. My last 2 things, breadwinning housewife and serial hobbyist. Okay. Serial hobbyist actually was just a comment on a YouTube video of someone calling me a serial hobbyist. And I was like, wait, that is what I am. I'm a serial hobbyist. I love a hobby. I don't throw them to the curb. I don't toss them to the curb. I'm not throwing them out. Like I keep up. But I am a serial hobbyist. Breadwinning housewife. This happened in 2020. I was home. I had become a breadwinning housewife. I had just bought my first home. I was in my townhouse. I was cooking. I was organizing. I was like really kind of becoming more of a homemaker, but I was still working. Like I was still the breadwinner and I was like building a business, right? So I jokingly one day said something to someone saying like, I basically become like a breadwinning housewife. And then it just kind of stuck. I said it online once. It stuck. We did a bunch of like merch stuff around it. I don't say it that much because I have this fear that it's going to become like a girl boss thing, because the idea behind breadwinning housewife and the reason I love it is because it's traditionally an oxymoron. Like those 2 things wouldn't be like grouped together, but I think it's actually really cool. Like I love someone that really surprises you and like has things about them that would maybe traditional like not contradict, but wouldn't traditionally be grouped in together. So basically someone that just does stuff that like kind of surprises you. Craig Conover actually is a good example of this. He's a man, but like he gardens. He has like, I don't know. I don't watch these shows, so I don't know like much about him, but I know he like gardens and has that like sewing shop, but he's also like an entrepreneur, like manly man. Like he's not, I don't know. And I don't know him like that well. So like maybe I don't know that much about him. I feel like that's just a good example. Like someone that does something that surprises you. Okay. So with the breadwinning housewife, I like that you don't put yourself in a box and you can be both and instead of either or. Like you can do whatever you want to do. You can be whatever you want to be. It doesn't matter if society tells you that like those things don't really match up. You can do it. It's not about like you can do it all at once. It's about like you can be whoever you want to be. And it doesn't matter if society traditionally tells you that that's like incorrect. You know what I mean? So anyways, that is what I have for the house guest glossary. Welcome to the show if y'all are new or if you guys are not new. This is like a good refresher. We have these mugs that I have right next to me as merch. They're the cutest mugs ever. I love them so much. Little house guest. We're working on some fall drops. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video or this podcast episode. If you guys are listening or watching on YouTube, I love y'all so much. And I will see you in the next episode.